Cell 11. Yes, I was arrested. It's been at least 5 years since I served my debt to society and tried to live a normal life. Don't think I'm trying to make excuses and repeat a well-known cliche, but I really had a rough childhood. I lost my father in a work accident, and shortly after, my mother succumbed to alcoholism. If I wanted to eat, I had to learn to beg, or steal. So it wasn't hard to get involved in more serious things, dangerous groups and bad influences. That's the recipe for ending up in jail at 21. Even though I had some run-ins with the police and even spent a night in the local precinct cell, nothing prepared me for what I would face behind bars. I got there and felt weak. Like the kid I was, just a child who had barely left diapers and already thought he ruled the block. There were many internal rules there, and you'd be surprised how respectful men who broke the law could be with each other. There were certain ethical norms, and in cases of disrespect, the court came into play. The court was a group formed by Francis, the boss of a faction, and some of his trusted men. They judged some issues and decided punishments, which could range from doing the laundry for the guy who offended for the rest of the week to something heavier. The guards didn't even bother, actually. It seemed to work well and saved them some trouble. And in return, Francis and his buddies received some perks, like cigarettes and chocolates. Some of the most notable rules in jail were never cut in line at the cafeteria, don't touch others' things without permission, and don't disrespect other inmates' visits. All of this seemed normal and reasonable. But there was one specific rule that bothered me. Never look at the painting on the wall of cell 11. I remember hearing some murmurs down the corridor from time to time, but the first time I understood the issue was on a night when Old Munford was telling his stories. Old Munford was a card-carrying swindler, used to deceive people with a mask of senility, and as you might expect, prison was a goldmine for him, where his skills of smooth talk and diplomacy fit well along with, of course, an excellent talent for storytelling to pass time on nights when it was too hot to sleep early. That particular night, the conversation revolved around the unwritten rules of the prison, and that's when Munford mentioned the mysterious rule of Cell 11. "Listen up, lads," he said with a tone of seriousness that grabbed everyone's attention. "In Cell 11, there's a painting on the wall, and there's a very clear rule about it. Never, under any circumstances, look directly at it." The murmurs spread throughout the circle of inmates. "It was painted by a guy who passed through here a long time ago for killing his own mother. He was locked up in solitary confinement in Cell 11, and during a psychotic episode, he used something that no one really knows what it is to paint the eye. They say that since then, strange things happen to those who defy this rule, from terrible nightmares to disappearances." "All right, old man. Enough of scaring the ladies," Francis's voice interrupted, and I swear I could see some inmates jump at fright. Some colleagues nervously laughed, trying to dissipate the heavy atmosphere that had settled. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake those words from my head. The painting in Cell 11, the psychotic murderer, the stories of nightmares and disappearances. All of it intrigued me in a way I hadn't expected. That night, lying in my own cell, the thought of the painting haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister loomed over that macabre art. Days passed and I did my best to avoid any mention of Cell 11, even though I thought about it all the time. It was a kind of obsession, mixed with fear and apprehension. I longed to know more, but I didn't have the courage to ask. However, fate, or perhaps my own imprudence, decided to play with me. I was playing basketball on one of the sports nights we had in the yard when Bob, a big, tall guy, threw himself against me to prevent a basket I was about to make. I felt my body collide with Bob's, and for a moment, the air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. I found myself awkwardly falling to the ground, the sound of my body hitting the concrete echoing in my mind. As I tried to catch my breath, I saw Bob's face, contorted in a mixture of anger and triumph. He knew he had taken me down. I took a deep breath, ignoring the throbbing pain spreading through me, and struggled to get up. Bob was laughing, a guttural sound that seemed to resonate in my ears. It only fueled my irritation. I wanted to retaliate, but I knew it would only result in bigger problems. So I swallowed my wounded pride and moved on, trying to focus on the game. But when the game ended, and everyone began to disperse, I felt a heavy gaze upon me. It was Bob, staring at me with a disturbing intensity. I frowned, feeling uncomfortable with the way he was watching me. It wasn't like I had never faced intimidating stares before, but there was something different about the way he was looking at me. Something that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore him and move on, but his presence hung over me like a shadow. As I walked away from the court, I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided to head back to my cell, hoping to find some peace and quiet there. But upon arrival, I was met with an unpleasant surprise. The guard responsible for the corridor, Tully, was standing in front of cell 11, with the door open and staring inside, mouth agape. "Hey, Tully?" I asked, approaching at a safe distance. "Guard Tully?" I leaned toward him. Suddenly, his neck jerked. His face slowly began to turn to face me. Now the moonlight caught his face very well, illuminating the pale skin that reflected like a beacon in that dark corridor. I could see now the tear streaks down his cheek, his eyes staring at me with an irritated red hue, as if he hadn't blinked in a while. Without changing the expression on his face, a scream poured from his throat along with a thick strand of saliva. My legs started to tremble as I watched the surreal scene unfold before me. Part of me wanted to run away as fast as possible, but another part was paralyzed by fear and morbid curiosity. What the hell was happening to him? Tully continued to stare at me with his bloodshot eyes, emitting that shrill scream that echoed through the empty prison corridors. I could feel my heart pounding irregularly in my chest as my mind tried to find a logical explanation for it all. The guard then staggered towards me, with a wobbly step, and placed his hand on my shoulder. I felt the grip tightening. "Tully, please!" I said louder, not to him, but to see if it would attract the attention of someone who could help. He put the other hand even stronger, his face now inches from mine, allowing me to smell an acidic odor emanating from his hoarse voice. Now his nails digging into my uniform, and I could hear them entering my skin, tearing. "Stop! Please!" My screams attracted another guard, who intervened in the situation before things got even more out of control. It took 2 more colleagues to get him off me, and 3 more to take him away from there, while I remained trembling and trying to process what had just happened. My whole body was tense, muscles contracted by fear and adrenaline. I couldn't get the image of Tully's face out of my mind. My mind automatically returned to the stories Munford had told about Cell 11 and the wall. Did that have any connection to what I had just witnessed? Was there really something painted on the wall? I looked at that open door, the number 11 engraved on the door's lead. It seemed to invite me, to mess with me. I could go there, see what was inside the cell. No one would need to know, right? I found myself raising my hand without even realizing it, heading towards the door, ready to open it a little more and see inside the cell, when a voice echoed behind me in the corridor, calling my name. I jumped out of the trance, startled, and turned to see the nurse who was calling me to be taken to the infirmary. "These are pretty nasty injuries," she commented, as she examined the wounds. It was nothing. I tried to sound tough. The only thing I noticed was the surreal beauty of the woman I hadn't seen before. I saw the name Linda pinned to her badge. "I've been through much worse on the streets, Linda." "Miss Linda," she corrected, tightening the bandage knot with a hint of annoyance at the taunt. I let out a small "ouch" of discomfort, and I could see a small smile forming on her face. "And Tully," I continued, trying to change the subject. He seemed strange, very strange tonight." Linda's expression instantly changed upon hearing the guard's name, her eyes darkening slightly, and a shadow of concern crossing her face. "We still don't have much information. It seems to be a psychotic episode. We had to sedate him." She shook her head, pointing to the stretcher behind me, where he now lay peacefully, in contrast to moments before. "A psychotic episode?" I repeated, my voice sounding more like a whisper than I would have liked. Does this happen here often?" Linda hesitated for a moment, as if pondering what to say. "Not so often, but it happens," she finally replied, carefully choosing her words. "The environment in here can be challenging for some. Not everyone can handle the pressure." A guard entered, requesting the girl's services for a sick inmate. She quickly adjusted the IV in my vein and bid me farewell, saying that I would be under observation that night. That early morning in the infirmary was long and restless. As I lay on the stretcher, watching the shadows dance on the walls in the dim light of the lamp, my mind was in turmoil. The image of Tully's contorted face, his red and empty eyes, continued to haunt my thoughts. Whenever I tried to close my eyes, that memory came back, until, irritated, I decided that I would sleep one way or another. I began to ignore the thoughts and try to induce sleep, no matter how shallow. Gradually, I calmed down, clearing that terrible picture from my mind, when I felt something strange. A tingling sensation took over my body. I felt my face start to warm up and a familiar smell in the air. I could smell that acidic odor coming from Tully's mouth. Now, right in my nose. I started to tremble, the palms of my hands sweating as I thought it was a vivid nightmare. Wishful thinking. I opened my eyes, only for my heart to race abnormally. There, with his face almost lying on mine, with his eyes glazed and his mouth wide open in a silent scream, was Tully, standing. I could see the empty stretcher and the sheets on the floor. On his arm, the needle now disconnected from the IV dripped blood all over the floor, in a darker tone than normal. Panic took hold of me as I stared at that surreal scene before my eyes. I wanted to do something, scream for help, but it was as if I were in sleep paralysis. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible, but my throat seemed closed, as if fear had completely taken over me. Tully remained there, motionless, like a statue, with those empty eyes and the mouth open in a silent scream. Blood slowly dripped from his disconnected needle, forming small dark puddles on the infirmary floor. Finally, after an eternity, I managed to gather the strength to move. With a tremendous effort, I reached for the button that called for help, and pressed it with all my might. Soon, the guards came running towards me, and I pointed to that flesh statue, trying to explain what had happened. They quickly took control of the situation, removing Tully from the infirmary and calling a medical team to check his condition. I still wake up occasionally trembling and sweating, with the image of the guard staring at me. On some warmer nights, I can even smell the ochre odor escaping from his mouth. I returned to my cell the next day, and Tully never returned to duty. They say he spent the rest of his days in a mental institution. But at that moment, considering all my ignorance, I could only wonder one thing as I stared at the metal bars. What the hell was in Cell 11? And that was Cell 11 by Carl Sefni. Now, as some of you may have noticed, this is a series and has an update already. Turns out there are now 3 parts, including the ending bit. And Carl Sefni has graciously given us permission to read all of them. So you best believe the other 2 parts, they're coming. And I'm very excited because I got to admit, I like the idea of like a really bizarre painting that turns people mad. It instantly makes me think of like H.P. Lovecraft because he loves delving into insanity kind of stuff. It also makes me think of The Picture of Dorian Gray, although that wasn't really about insanity. It was more like he was sort of immortal because of the painting. It was great book. If you haven't read it, I'm not going to really read too much else into it. I don't want to spoil it if you haven't read it, but it's just awesome is what it is. Anyway, those are just kind of the first things that came to mind. I like the idea of there's a bit of backstory, there's a bit of you get a fair bit of world building about what's going on in these cells. You don't really know too much information yet, but you've seen an effect on at least one of the people who is a prison guard, which is quite interesting because if anything you would think, oh, okay, it'll probably be a prisoner who gets put in that cell, or maybe they're walking by one day and they'll go crazy, and that'd be interesting. But having it be a prison guard, I think is just a little bit more interesting because he probably doesn't really know that, that this could happen. Whereas the prisoners, they talk as they would. And so, that's they exchange stories and stuff. I mean, what else can you really do in prison besides just kind of pass the time, right? Whereas as a prison guard, you get to go home. You can go do other things with your life. So it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. I'm curious where the next 2 parts are going to go then. Because this already feels like it's kind of got an ending. It's a good ending. So I'm wondering if we're going to maybe eventually have our main character go into Cell 11. Hopefully we get a better description of the painting and stuff. That'd be quite interesting. Maybe they themselves go mad. That'd be something. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm very curious to find out, though. I really like this story. This has been Nate at Night. I've enjoyed myself, and I sure hope you have too. We'll see you for part 2. Take care.
Thank you so much to our Patreon members and YouTube members for making all this content possible. You know who you are.